This time on Nightmare World, we had chickens, Callum turns down 1.7 million, and the art team gets stuck in a dungeon for 3 weeks. That's right, ladies and gents, we are finally back with another devlog after a long 4.5 months. Now, despite what many people may think, no, the project is not dead. If anything, it's been going faster and progressing more than ever. During these 4.5 months, we've almost doubled the size of most of our teams on the project. And by doing so, we've improved our workflow and we've actually managed to get a hell of a lot done. So with this being such a big devlog, let's jump straight into it. But first of all, I want to give a quick disclaimer, as I always do. You're going to see many things that have either been programmed and not attached to any sort of art at all, or you're going to see things that are in model form but not textured yet. You'll probably even see some things that are placeholder textures just so I don't have to look at a grey box. Obviously, this is not staying this way. No process goes from started to completed instantly. There is always a process in between that many of you will never see in other games. So, let's jump in and talk about what's been done since the last devlog. Gem cutting. We've introduced a prototype of our gem cutting station, currently called the Grinder. The Grinder will allow you to take gems obtained through mining and cut them into specific cuts unlocked through either your skill level, quest rewards, or blueprint drops from creatures and dungeons. Speaking of quest rewards, we should probably talk about our new quest system, or at least the approach we're taking. Quests in most games usually follow one of two implementations. Short 30 to 60 second quests that have almost no storytelling or meaning and are incredibly forgettable. Games like WoW and New World use these, and they're really only serving as a barrier to entry on endgame, and less of a storytelling tool. The only benefit there are to these is how fast they are to implement by a developer. The other example is long story-based quests, such as RuneScape. These quests are usually between 30 minutes to 3 hours each, and are full of story and lore. These are personally my favourite type of quests, as they allow developers to attach much more meaningful and unique rewards to them. The downside to these are obviously the immense time and programming that needs to be put into these, meaning RuneScape usually only adds 2 to 3 of these a year. Our solution to this problem aims to allow us to create long, meaningful story-based quests in a short period of time. We're using something that our entire game has been built on from day one. We opted to use a tag-based system for almost everything. Items are not hard-coded, but instead use metadata to help define them. For example, all of our ores have a metadata tag named ore. All of these ores also have additional tags to define the type of ore as well, such as tin and copper. Now, while this might not seem relevant to players of the games, I'll explain the benefits of our system. Everything uses this tag-based system, including our modular weapons, meaning if a player uses 3 different metals for the hilt, blade, and pommel of a short sword they're making, the final weapon will have the tags iron, copper, firestone, as well as the tags short sword and sword, along with a few others. This allows us to program with a method called abstraction, meaning we don't need to hard-code quests, but rather use our tags, where you bring him a copper sword that you've made. Usually, games will need to program a list of every item that they would like to allow the quest giver to accept. This is okay, however, it's time-consuming, and if they ever add a new type of sword to the game and forget to add it to that list, well, it just feels really strange to the player when an NPC won't accept their newly added copper rapier that they just crafted. This tag system works retroactively. And as an example, this also allows us to add a colour tag to items. So if you have a quest where you need to sneak into a person's house while wearing stealthy black clothing, you can literally use any item in the game that is black. So, in terms of creating quests, this allows a non-developer to create a 1-hour quest in only 90 minutes of development, depending on the complexity, of course. Another benefit of this is that the quests are no longer prone to constantly breaking. As long as we keep the overall tag system up to standards, all quests will be bug-free and just work. Non-developers can create these quests through a selection of spreadsheets and drop-down menus. Think of it like advanced visual scripting. It removes the chance of bugs being introduced. Now, onto the magic mirror. This was a small thing that we added to allow devs and players to customize their appearance after they've created their character. They will be found throughout the world in places such as clothing shops and barbers and any other place that they make sense. Daz did all the work on this one. We all know that mirrors in games that use realistic reflections are super expensive on performance. So this mirror uses a cheap, rough reflection until it's interacted with. As soon as the player interacts with it, it shows the high detail reflection for just that player. While it's standing unused in the world, it has a really cool magical ripple effect as well. At this point, I'd like to address the question most people probably have here. Last devlog, we said that our new beautiful character models would be going in-game soon, and while that was true at the time, we tasked Oreo, our AI expert, on making the player controller feel and look more natural. This included split body animations, meaning the character no longer has to be doing one animation, but can have a separate animation on the upper and lower body at the same time. A good example of this is walking while swinging a sword or pickaxe. The lower body can be walking while the upper body can be swinging. It looks infinitely more natural than in games like WoW, where launching an attack while moving will cause your legs to stand still as the character slides across the floor. That's a long way of me saying that the new character model is being adjusted to work with the new methods of animation that we've decided to use. This also allows the upper body to turn slightly while the player moves forward, looking in a more natural way. Last devlog, we discussed our combat prototype. Since then, Daz has had the mammoth task of starting implementation of it into the Nightmare world. This system alone ties into so many other systems that are being worked on at the same time that this one isn't going to be a week's work. Daz has already built all the framework for combat and non-combat abilities. He's currently working close with Oreo, who is working on the AI system for our creatures to make the combat feel great. While we can't show off the combat itself until the AI work is finished off, we can show off the obelisk. Currently, the obelisk is more of a developer name to refer to a place that the player can swap out their ability bar setup. Anything can technically be an obelisk, but in Nightmare World you'll likely see obelisks come in the form of taverns, banks, or world anchors, which are places of great power tethering the floating islands of Nightmare World together. Current functionality of an obelisk allows a player to see all of their unlocked abilities from skills both combat and non-combat, and allow them to select a loadout of these. This is one of the ways players will be able to use the classless system to build a fantasy character of their dreams. Add or remove healing, defensive, damaging, and gathering abilities to their bars, along with allowing players to swap between their display titles that they've unlocked. The combat system is still in development, so I'm hoping it's ready to show off for the next devlog. No promises though. Next up, an update to something we've shown off in previous devlogs, the smithing system. Previously, the old smithing system worked by selecting blade pieces on a single bench and confirming them to get your sword. While we've kept almost all of that, we realised that for players that wanted to make lots of the same types of a sword and sell it on, this could become tedious and tiring, especially as the number of blade options increase. This is why we moved over to a two-table system. The workbench will work exactly the same as previous system did. However, instead of pressing confirm and crafting the weapon, it will now give you a blueprint of the weapon. This blueprint can then be taken to the anvil, which is currently a work in progress and definitely not using the final version of the diegetic UI. Here you will be able to drag in your blueprint you just created along with the metals that you want for each segment, the wood you want to use for the handle, and eventually the leather you'll want to wrap the handle in. And once you've done that, you can either make more swords from that blueprint or trade it on to a friend who's jealous of your new flashy weapon. While we're on the topic of modular weapons, we've started prototyping the modular tools as well, currently limited to the pickaxe, with the shovels and axes being added soon. Next up, we've added consumables. Consumables are any item that can do a single action and then vanish afterwards. Currently we have two consumables in the form of soup item, which removes any fatigue you may have had over time. And then we have the Book of Knowledge. When used, this book will give XP to the lowest skill you have, currently at a rate of 30 XP multiplied by the level in that skill. The Book of Knowledge is a common item rewarded from my absolute favourite skill, Archaeology. This month, I added the first prototype of the Archaeology skill into Nightmare World. There will be 3 main ways to train this skill, but currently I've only implemented the first iteration of one of these. This is what we're calling archaeological finds, or tasks. An archaeology area is defined by an invisible box in the world, marking that area as somewhere you can dig up artifacts. Each box has tags, previously mentioned in the quest system, to determine what sort of area it is. For example, an area may have the tags Sporrid, referring to our race of mushroom people, and maybe even the battlefield tag, showing this area is both a historical sporrid area and a place a battle took place in the past. When receiving a task from the Archaeology Master, they may ask you to find them a sporrid artifact. Now, because of the tag system, you can go to any dig site that belongs to a sporrid area and retrieve the artifact for them. So, how does finding an artifact work? Currently, the UI feedback for this is early in progress, but as it currently stands, you'll be assigned the sporrid task. As soon as you dig in a sporrid dig site, you'll be told that you feel that the artifact that you're looking for is close by. Then you'll dig around playing a game of hot and cold until you find the artifact. As soon as you locate it, it will appear, and you can dig it up. After that, you return to the Archaeology Master that assigned you that task. You receive your reward and get another assignment. I know this won't be enjoyable to everybody, which is why in the future there will be 3 main options for training this in different ways. Another potentially exciting reward from archaeology is something that we're starting work on soon. When a player dies, they have a set amount of time to return to their corpse and retrieve their inventory. If a player somehow doesn't return in time, some of the items they have dropped will be added to the archaeology loot table for the area in which they died, meaning loot from training archaeology will always be interesting and potentially be incredibly valuable in rare occasions. Also on screen is the cute little sporrid artifact that Cat made. It didn't quite make it in engine in time for the devlog, sadly. Now, time to move on to the biggest feature of this devlog. Dungeons weren't something that was high up on our internal roadmap. However, one evening I had a bit of a creative spark and decided to prototype our dungeon system while it was still fresh in my mind. I showed it to the team in one of our meetings and we decided to run with it. Most studios have a choice to make when it comes to dungeons, and that choice is between handcrafted or procedural. The obvious trade-offs here are handcrafted dungeons having a lot of meaningful story-driven gameplay, but very low replayability. On the other hand, procedural dungeons have an almost infinite replayability, but feel empty and meaningless when it comes to story. We've approached the dungeons with a hybrid solution. We're using what's referred to as guided procedural generation. This means that dungeon layouts are generated off a set of simple rules to keep them to our style, and also allow us to add quests and story to the same dungeons regardless of layout and size. It also means that we can have the dungeon start and finish in the way we want and have it be different each time you enter. What you're looking at is our underground city dungeon that the sporrid inhabited after its previous occupants. I won't spoil the lore, so that's staying vague for this video. After we decided to work more on this system, I stole 3 artists, Ren, Kat, and Sarah. They spent at least 3 weeks on this dungeon kit and have absolutely smashed it. And to answer the burning question, yes, this is a complete build kit, and yes, players will be able to unlock it as a rare drop from the final boss, allowing them to build their own play-around houses with it as well. We also decided to trial something else here. We noticed that although our build kit textures tiled very nicely, we wanted something to break up large sections of wall or floor. So we made a procedural moss system that is built into the dungeon build kit. It uses world coordinates, normals, and vertex data to create a seamless moss system that works everywhere in the world, wherever the pieces are placed. We'll likely use this system on other build kits for things like rust, grime, water stains, and creeping ivy. Now, the technical side of the dungeon system is something that I could honestly make a 2-hour video on, but for the sake of keeping this video watchable, I'll give you the brief version. The dungeon generates with different types of room classifications: spawn rooms, combat rooms, skilling rooms, which act as places to stop a mine, do archaeology, chop trees, and gather herbs. These are more rewards that will be off of the main path. Then we have shortcut rooms. These will use the previously mentioned skills to find a possibly faster route to the end boss, provided you have the levels required. Next is puzzle rooms. We don't have any of these in the game yet, but these will offer a puzzle that must be completed to unlock the door to the next room. Then of course we have boss rooms, also something we are waiting to add after the AI is completed. We tested the system out in a multiplayer test, and honestly, these dungeons are a blast to get completely lost in while you explore. Moving on to something that also ties into the dungeon system, we've also created a few tools, both inside and outside of Unreal. For the dungeon kit, I needed to do a lot of testing, and as these dungeons are based off of a seed, I needed a way to construct a seed in reverse. So I created a map tool that allows me to map out my own dungeons and have it spit out a seed, allowing me to test out specific layouts. We've also created another tool that has already proven to be a massive help to us. We use ARM maps or ARM maps in all of our materials. An ARM map is an ambient occlusion, roughness, and metallic map all stored in a single texture. Most people will probably be wondering how that's possible. As all three of those maps use single colour values, you can pack one into each of the R, G, and B channels of a texture, saving you a lot of disk space and draw calls on the shader, sometimes making it literally 3 times as efficient. Now, while this is efficient on performance, it's not quite as fast to make these. There are ways to do it in Photoshop, but it's very time consuming to do a lot of these. It often takes 1 to 2 minutes per texture. So, with a mammoth task ahead of us, I took an hour and created a Python script that will create an ARM map automatically in under 5 seconds, then save that map out for us. Canon and myself also created a build compiler and deployment tool that also has a Discord bot built into it. We called it Bob the Builder, meaning creating client-server pairs for our builds and deploying them to the appropriate servers is now triggered by a single command in Discord. There's a lot more built into this, such as error logging that gets fed right back into a Discord echo chamber. Bob is essentially an automated babysitter for an otherwise tedious process. On to a few final updates. We got sick of managing the inventory while testing our systems, so Daz created a fully functioning bank. The art and the UI is yet to be finished, but there's a working system there. We're also very excited to get our first NPC creature in-game. This little cutie is called the Chodo. Modelled and textured by Rotsu, then rigged and animated by our new animator, Endless. Here you can see 3 variants, the hen, the cock, and the chick. These are also awaiting the AI before we see them roaming around and getting slaughtered by the players. And finally, a little update on why this devlog was delayed for so long. We got approached by investors who had been following the development of Nightmare World. This has been a completely new area for me and took a hell of a lot of preparation. I wanted to hold off on the devlogs until we had an outcome and a definitive answer to give you guys. We said we wanted to be completely transparent from start to finish, so we're doing just that. The brief version of this is that we came out of it with no investments. The good news is that we were offered £1.7 million in funding over 3 years. The catch was that the investors wanted 70% ownership of our company. While most studios would jump at the sight of £1.7 million, we want our company and our game to have a long, successful life. If we took the offer, we'd have been living like kings for 3 years, but after that period ends, we'd be struggling to find the money to reinvest in our company, and it would likely sink shortly after investment ends. Now, some of you may be asking, how the hell is that good news? And the simple answer is that investors see the value in what we're making, which is more of a confidence boost to us than you could ever imagine. Sure, it sucks that we were sat in front of a piece of paper, just one signature away from 1.7 million. But the team is passionate about this game and wants to see it last a lifetime, even if it takes a bit longer through self-funding, which will come in the form of Patreon very shortly. I hope that this devlog has been worth the wait that you guys have had to endure. And there's some more good news. For those of you who want more frequent but smaller updates, I advise that you go and subscribe to the official Nightmare World YouTube channel. On there, we'll be able to post shorter updates more often and give you guys a deeper look at each individual system. As always, a massive thank you to my patrons, and if you guys are watching this live, I am going to be over on Twitch right now. Feel free to hop over and we can talk more about Nightmare World.